Before we even get started, yes, I know I look like I just came out of a vagina.
We were just talking about vaginas.
About what?
Vaginas, the woman's vagina.
Oh,
Just sharing stories and saying how much we enjoy them.
I agreed to do a musical, and in the contract it stated that I needed to be clean shaven like a month and a half out, otherwise I'd get like weird tan lines and stuff. I guess it makes sense. I'm not particularly happy about it, but here we are. Babyface Luke, here to report on gaming news stuff. So I just got home from a long day of classes, regardless, it's not important. And I read this story on Yahoo Finance about something in the gaming industry, which is pretty rare that something like that pops up in my feed. So naturally, I checked it out quickly. Turns out, Shawn Layden is leaving Sony Interactive Entertainment, which is... it's big. I think there's a common tendency for a lot of people to think that Sony and Microsoft are just these big amorphous globular companies that don't really do a whole lot. They just kind of lay back, make consoles, and that's about it. That's not the case. Sony Interactive Entertainment is the company that basically, it's the kingmakers of the industry at this point. Mostly thanks to Shawn Layden. These are the guys that are funding huge projects like the new God of War or Insomniac Studios' Spider-Man game. These are the guys that are giving the money to the studios. They see the potential and they end up creating some of the greatest games that have ever launched on any console generation, much less this one. And again, I think it's easy for us to just assume that this floats up and maybe Sony just got lucky with the projects that they backed this time around, but that's really not the case. When you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars at play in the development of these games, the people managing at the very tippy top who are green lighting projects and red lighting other ones, they have to know what they're doing. They have to have a vision of what the gaming industry wants. They have to know what the industry wants before they've even seen it, years before they've ever seen it. So somebody like Shawn Layden is a crucial element in the whole system, the mechanism that is Sony's gaming business. So this news drops out of nowhere that Shawn Layden is leaving Sony Interactive Entertainment. And if you're not familiar with him, basically he's the chairman of Sony Worldwide Studios. He's the head honcho that determines what studios are working on what projects, how much money they can have for each of them, what the timelines are. He's in charge of all of it, or I guess he was. Now, the obvious question is why? That's the question Khaleesi's been asking the whole time I've been sitting here. Yeah, don't worry, I'm gonna answer it. She's so impatient. And I've done some digging to try to figure out why this is happening, and Yahoo Finance did a pretty impressive and exhaustive expose on this topic. I'll have it linked in the description if you want to read all of it. But effectively, we don't really know what's going on or why he's leaving the company. They haven't said that it was a retirement. They haven't said that it was a firing or a welcoming to leave. As of the time of this recording, Shawn Layden hasn't posted anything to Twitter. He's made no public statements. He hasn't come out and said, no, you know what, guys, I'm just tired. I'm done. I'm going to relax with my wife and my millions of dollars. He hasn't said that, which implies that it might not have been entirely consensual. Granted, this is just speculation, but somebody like Reggie Fils-Aimé, who was the head of Nintendo of America, when he retired, he let everyone know he was retiring. He had a video message, he tweeted it out, and Reggie and Shawn are friends. They're following each other on Twitter. They've appeared in interviews together. You would think that they would work at least in the same way if it was also a sort of consenting separation, maybe a retirement or maybe just a time to move on. Regardless, it's not clear why Shawn Layden left the company, and usually when that happens, it's indicative of something being less than consensual. So I started doing some more digging, trying to figure out if somebody were to push out Shawn Layden, who would do it. And there actually is a guy. His name is Jim Ryan. Now, if we just rewind a little bit real quick, the important thing you need to understand is that Jim Ryan started taking over more and more control of Sony, specifically their entertainment divisions, back in 2018 when the company went through a major restructuring. Because previous to that restructuring, Sony really operated out of Japan, and then they had a bunch of kind of branching off child companies. They didn't consider themselves a global multinational corporation. In 2018, that changed. And so with this major restructuring, they determined that they needed to have a bunch of people in a clear hierarchy that everybody else could report to. And that's where Jim Ryan came in. He stepped in with another guy named John Kodera, and they basically headed up the two major branches of Sony's entertainment divisions. These things are annoying me. Now, of course, Shawn Layden was still around at this time when this restructuring was taking place, and they weren't ignoring him. They actually put him in a chairman position at Sony Worldwide Studios, specifically so that he could manage that, while the other two guys, Kodera and Ryan, managed the day-to-day business of the company. They did all the big picture stuff, and they left Shawn Layden to just focus on the games and the studios. And everything was going really well. So well, in fact, that in February they announced that Jim Ryan was to be promoted to president and CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment Worldwide, which is a pretty significant pay grade increase, if I do say so myself. And this put Ryan at the tippity top of the hierarchy within Sony Interactive Entertainment. And it seemed to work out pretty well, but almost immediately Ryan and Layden started butting heads. Most of this seemed to be over things such as crossplay and the idea of cloud networking services and like PlayStation Now, game streaming like Google Stadia, that type of thing. Effectively, Ryan thought that it was going to be a big thing. They needed to double down on game streaming, whereas Shawn Layden thought that they had a lot more time to sit back on the hardware. They didn't need to rush the PlayStation Now. Players didn't seem to be super into it. They weren't connecting with it. They were okay with buying a console and playing the games that they buy instead of effectively renting games and streaming them. As for crossplay, that was something that Shawn Layden was super open to. It's something that we saw at the Game Awards last year when he, Phil Spencer, and Reggie Fils-Aimé all got together and shook hands, were smiling, and they said that this was a sign of the three companies coming together and working together to try to bring crossplay into reality. And this seemed really bizarre because for so long everybody else was down for crossplay, whether it was Microsoft with PC and with Xbox or Nintendo. Everybody seemed fairly open to it. The only problem was Sony. Sony wasn't playing nice, but the head of their public-facing side of their business, Shawn Layden, he seemed open to it. So what was the missing piece? Why weren't they doing it if seemingly the head of the company was down for it? Well, now we know, thanks to a bunch of interviews that Jim Ryan gave to a few Japanese publications, that all of this had to do with his belief that Sony was not obligated to provide cross-platform play. They needed to protect their player base that they had accumulated over the course of the whole generation, and that by giving players cross-platform play, it would open them up to all sorts of vulnerabilities, not just personally, but also in terms of data and all sorts of things like that from other sources such as Microsoft servers or Steam servers, things that Sony didn't have control over. So he took this sort of pro-consumer approach to not approving of a pro-consumer policy and feature. It's kind of weird. And this is what Yahoo Finance reported on, that there were these two big things that these two titans of industry were butting heads over, and they seem fairly innocuous and unimportant at first glance. But you have to realize these are two completely different visions for the next generation of consoles. The next generation of consoles is coming around within a year. That's when we're going to start hearing about this. That's when all of these decisions have to be made. And on this side, you have one guy, head of the company, that thinks that crossplay is not a concern, shouldn't be doubled down on, isn't important, and they shouldn't do it. And he also thinks that game streaming is the real future and it's coming faster than anybody sees or realizes. And then on the other side, you have Shawn Layden, and he says, no, crossplay is very, very important and we should be offering it to our customers. And also, hardware is still the future. We have several years left of that, maybe even another generation after this one. Let's slow down on the game streaming. Players aren't that into it. The point is that these are two fundamentally different visions of where the industry and where Sony as a company should target and move towards. That doesn't tend to work within a corporate environment. I mean, another example would be something like in the 1990s with Michael Eisner over at Disney. He had a very clear idea of what he wanted for Disney and all of their theme parks, where he said, you know what, I want to make sure everything's budget friendly. We're going to cut costs everywhere we can. We have ideas for expansion, but we're going to keep everything within this very strict budget. And as a result, he did a lot of damage to Disney's brand, but only because people who disagreed with him tended to get demoted or leave the company fairly quickly once they started butting heads. And so all of this wrapped together, it's very fresh news, like literally a couple hours old at the time I'm recording this. I haven't read through 10Ks. I haven't read through financial documents. I haven't been given leaks that nobody else has seen. Most of this is speculation. But what we do know is that Shawn Layden has said nothing, which would imply that he's not super thrilled about leaving. He's not retiring to the Cayman Islands and just chilling out for the rest of his life. It seems as though this might not have been entirely consensual, or at the very least a happy arrangement. And furthermore, it seems to be a perfect lineup of Jim Ryan's vision for the company. He's got this guy that completely disagrees with what he sees as the future of the company. He's going to kind of welcome him to maybe step down before the next generation, before all of these changes need to come and get kicked into high gear. He'll put his own guy in place, and then they'll just move on. And I mean, to be perfectly honest, if ever there was a time to make a shift like this, if Jim Ryan saw this coming a year ago and he was like, you know what, I don't think Shawn is seeing what we're seeing for the next generation. Yeah, he's responsible for the vast success of this generation, but I don't think we need him for next gen, and I think he's going to hold us back next gen. If that's what Jim Ryan was thinking, this would be the time to do it. And the reason is pretty simple. We're about to go through a huge shift when next generation consoles come into the picture, as every generation tends to do. If you look back at Microsoft and Sony over the last 20 or so years, every time a new console generation comes around, right before, usually in the 18 months beforehand, is when they tend to shuffle around their management, because you need stability within the course of the generation. And then before the next generation starts, when things are about to change, that's when you should capitalize on it, put new guys in, mess around with it, align it so it works with your vision of the company, and set it up that way. The question is obviously whether or not Sony is going to be able to keep up the same pressure and the same strategies now that Shawn Layden is apparently out of the picture. Obviously, Jim Ryan thinks that this isn't going to be that difficult. He thinks that this job could be done by somebody other than Shawn Layden, but we'll just have to see. But the guys within Sony don't seem particularly excited about this. For instance, there was a leak that came out to Game Daily, somebody who asked for anonymity. So again, take this with a major grain of salt. We don't know for sure if this is a Sony employee or not. But what they said was, quote, "This is the least amount of clarity that we've ever had on a new console this close to transition. I believe that the global restructuring is exponentially exacerbating the already difficult process of transitioning to a new generation. And now we're getting nervous. Very nervous." Furthermore, this same individual has been quoted as saying that Sony's been very tight-lipped and hasn't been sharing anywhere near the same amount of information about the next generation of consoles with their primary development studios as they have in the past. When a development studio such as a Naughty Dog or now an Insomniac reaches out for information about firmware or software eccentricities within their dev kits of the next generation of consoles, it tends to take them close to a month to get a response. It's a very inefficient system, which is kind of expected during a major transition like this, during a huge restructuring. But again, that's not good, and that doesn't bode well for an entire next generation of consoles that's coming out in about a year, that will need launch titles, will need all of this stuff. It sounds like behind the scenes, it's a total crap. It's bad. Got to remember to keep it family friendly. But the last piece of evidence we have that really affirms that this seems to be a corporate shakeup is the fact that Atsushi Morita, the president of Sony Interactive Entertainment Japan division, he was actually just welcomed to retire, which apparently within Sony Interactive Entertainment Japan, it's pretty common for people to retire at 60. But this guy just turned 60 and now he's out and they are going to be replacing him as well. It could be a happy little coincidence. Maybe Shawn and this guy decided to retire at the exact same time for independent reasons, or maybe it was just that it was time for them to move on. So while it is mostly speculation, I tend to lean towards the idea that this is a major restructuring going on at Sony. We'll probably see more stuff like this in the next few months, and there will probably be much more of it that we won't ever see or hear about because it'll be behind closed doors with people that aren't public facing. But this does seem to indicate that Sony is making some major shifts in their strategy before the next generation of consoles. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, I'll leave up to you. There, does that answer your question? She won't even look at me now. But that's all for me. Thank you for watching, honestly and truly. If you have any thoughts, leave them down in the comment section below. I love you all very much. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video. Peace out. Keep it hot. Don't worry, I'll get the beard back as soon as I can. Bye-bye. So I just sat down to edit the video that I just filmed and you just watched, and I realized I didn't talk about this, so I'm going to now. I wanted to create some sort of affordable, limited edition merchandise item that you can get that ships worldwide, that is very, very personal and unique. So what I did is I took a little photo shoot of Khaleesi and we created these custom Khaleesi stickers. Yes, it's actually her. And they're printed right here in Colorado. They'll go onto any water bottle, computer, whatever you want to put them on. And I'm gonna sign them and we're gonna ship them to you with a custom note and everything in the envelope. $5. We'll ship worldwide for free. LukeStevens.net if you're interested. We only printed 400 of the stickers, so make sure if you want one, you jump on it now because they're probably not gonna be here for very long. And like I said, they're limited edition. So the plan is that once these are gone, they're gone. But that's all for me. Thank you for watching. I love you all. Bye-bye.